Welcome to this, my 8th video tutorial on Nina, and in this one we're going to look at the Imaging tab. So if I bring up Nina and do Connect All by hitting this button here, what we're going to do is look at the default layout for the Imaging tab and show you how to rearrange it so that it meets your needs. After hitting the Connect All, the devices should all show a little power on indicator next to them. Now, clicking on the Imaging tab brings up what I call the Operations window, and this is what you typically would look at whilst you're running a sequence. And this is a customized view which I have made up over a number of nights. And I'll go back to the default view and show you how you customize the way it's laid out. So what I have is an Imaging tab, which allows me to just simply take a single exposure for test purposes and so on. There's a reminder of where I am in the sequence as it runs through. There's a telescope tab that shows me what the telescope's doing and weather information. There's also a filter tab, which in this case I actually have control and physically can change something. Not all the windows in this Imaging tab have controls, they're mostly for information. The other one is the focuser, so I can manually move the focuser using this tab here. And there's also a camera tab here which shows cooling and warming, so all I can do there is set cooling and warming. These ones here, this is where images will appear when you acquire them. This is one that shows the information from the last autofocus run, and if you've enabled it, this one is star detection. At the top of this screen are a number of icons relating to each of the little panels on the display. Those that are shown are highlighted, in this case with a bright green colour, and those which aren't being shown are in a dull orange colour. And there are a number of different windows in the standard view, and there are also some additional tools on the right hand side, some of which are associated with plugins that you can optionally install. So for instance, 3-point polar alignment is a plugin. So if I look here under plugins and look at installed, 3-point polar alignment is here. Another one is scope 3D view. So if I go back to here and do 3D view, pressing that once brings it up, and if I press it again it closes it. This isn't necessarily an optimum layout. I have a very small image history section down the end here, which is probably not a good idea, and I have a nice long one for my guider statistics, so maybe I need a bit of a rearrangement. But what I'm going to do is reset all of these to the default layout, and I do that under Options, the Imaging tab, and Reset Layout. So having done that and going back to the Imaging tab, it brings up something which has got virtually everything on the screen, not all of which I actually want. So for instance, my 3-point polar alignment I'm going to get rid of. I don't need star detection results particularly, or star detection options. 3D view I'm going to move somewhere else. Star annotation options I'm going to remove. Filter offset calculator. This is a utility from a plugin that calculates all the focus offsets each of your filter positions. I typically do it once and then I forget about it. So for the moment I'm going to remove it because it just is further clutter on the display. What I try to do is put some of these windows in a system that has 2 tabs, such as this, and that way it means that I don't necessarily just have to see them simultaneously, but I can quickly go from one to the other. Having taken out those windows I don't need anymore, I'm going to rearrange the ones on screen, and you do this by dragging them. So for instance, the boundary between these 2 windows you can drag up and down and give more space. So I like to have a lot of space for my sequencer so I can see exactly where it is, because there's no facility to collapse it on the screen here. The HFR history, which is all the different exposures and how many stars and what size the stars are, tends to be a long graph, and I'd actually prefer it to be on a long axis like the guider. So I'm going to drag this, drag the header I should say, and I'm going to make it a tab, and I do that by dropping it on the tab icon when my mouse is hovering over the destination. So now I have HFR history and guider, and if I simply just do that I can alter the order. So I'm going to look around the screen and make sure that each of the tabs are sized correctly. So for instance, that's got plenty of space until I expand out, but since I wouldn't necessarily need to see those all the time, I can leave those alone. The telescope tab and the weather tab are good. This one down here, the image history, that's not great, and that is one which is used which displays images themselves. So I'm going to drag its header and put it as a tab on the main screen, and I'm just going to change the order. The other one which I might put on here is the autofocus results, or stick it in here instead, because the statistics, which is the statistics and a histogram, doesn't need to be this size. So I need to bring out the autofocus, and I think it's around here somewhere. So autofocus, if I click on it, it will typically put it somewhere arbitrarily. I can now drag it and put it beneath this one. So there we go, I've got autofocus, I've got the button I can see and display, and it shows the last result. So you get the idea of being able to manipulate things on the screen. On the main imaging screen there are a number of controls. You can zoom 1:1, which is typically the default. You can zoom so that it fits the image area here. You can also add a crosshair on and off. You can also look at the corners of the image to check collimation. And these two buttons here toggles an auto stretch, which is just purely an image stretch for the screen purposes only. It doesn't alter the data, and automatic star detection. And if you're focusing using a Bartonov mask, there's one of these that allows you to draw a rectangle within the Bartonov spikes, and Nina will try to detect the spikes and show the error. So there we have the main screen, and you can alter this dynamically, and it's saved with the profile. So when I go back into options and general, those layouts are now saved with this particular active profile, as are the colours. So going back to it, one of the things that we can also see is what it's doing in terms of plate solving. So that's another tab that's sometimes quite useful, and I think it's one of these up here, plate solving. So if I click on that one, it's popped it over here. So again, I'm going to drag it, and I'm going to make it a tab of this one. Again, I'm going to drag it over there. So plate solving just tells you how accurately the telescope centered. It's sometimes useful. You don't have to have it all the time, but I can hide it by just clicking on the image tab here. Automatic sequences are all well and good, but there are plenty of occasions where you want manual control. And on screen there are some manual controls. For instance, there's the focuser tab, you can move in and out, and there's a camera tab which just simply takes a basic exposure, which you can change the exposure time, the binning and the filter. The other thing you can do is do basic focus. So for instance, you can tell the camera to loop a short exposure, point it to a bright star, and then manually move the focuser backwards and forwards until the star is basically there. Then you can hit the abort button, which appears here, and run autofocus. So those three little controls often get you to somewhere where you can start using autofocus from there on. A couple of other little things which we mentioned before: you can change the filter. The other tabs that have controls aren't necessarily on this page. So for instance, if I hit the dome tab and bring up a dome, all it does is it shows the status. So I'm just going to get rid of that, And if I go into the Equipment tab and the dome, what happens is the dome controls appear here if you've connected to a dome. So for instance, if I connect to a simulator, I can now open and close the shutter and move it round in blobs of 10 degrees or so. And I can also stop it. So there's some basic controls I can do. And the use of simulators, which I've just done there, is sometimes quite a useful thing to do to get yourself acclimatized to how Nina works. And you can go quite a long way using simulators rather than real sky and cameras, and it's helpful sometimes. So I'm going to disconnect from that. The other manual controls you will find on the Camera tab, so you can change the default gain, the USB speed and its mode, and whether it includes the overscan area, and also has a duplication of controls for warming and cooling. The filter wheel allows you to move the filter. The Focuser tab has the same controls as on the other screen, where you can move either to an absolute position or backwards and forwards, and it can also enable or disable temperature compensation. The Rotator is similar, and the Telescope tab has a very rudimentary series of homing and parking commands and very little else. Guider, at the moment it's connected to PhD2. There are a number of settings that you can do, which is typically around dithering and settle tolerances, but it doesn't have any controls as such, though you can set the profile that it powers up with. The switches will have controls, so for instance, if I put in a simulator, there are controls and I can turn something on and off by hitting the toggle button. So this, in this particular case, is a power toggle. So I'm going to disable that. Flat panels, equally, you have got a little bit of control, but very little on this particular panel. And the weather is really just a status. And the safety monitor, again, is just really a status. There are a few more remaining controls on the Imaging tab. For instance, there's the start sequence, which then becomes a stop icon for when it's already started. And there are a couple of places where you can plate solve something. So on the plate solving tab, if you hit this button, it'll take a picture and plate solve it. If you have an image already and you just simply want to know its coordinates, you use this button up here, plate solve current image. To complete the picture, there are a couple of controls on the Guiding tab, similar to PhD2. You can change the axes, both X and Y, of the guiding graph, and you can also clear it out. And on the HFR history one, when you run your cursor over it, you can choose what you want to display and whether you want to display all results or the results of a particular filter, and so on. Well, it seems that the sky gods are smiling down on me, and it may well be clear tonight, in which case I can do a practical demonstration. For now, I'm going to run a sequence on the portable rig and the same target in the observatory as well, but obviously the observatory has to deal with moving roofs and things. If I hit play down here, it'll start the sequence, or from the Imaging tab. I'm going to do it on the Sequencer tab so you can see in more detail what's happening. So if I hit play, you'll see a little circular icon here that shows that this is the active instruction, and if I expand that out, you will see that it's trying to find home. So it's unparked the scope and is finding home, and as it progresses, little checkboxes appear against each instruction. I'll pause that and come back when that's finished, because it takes about a minute. Okay, so it's done that, and it's now parking the scope and it's waiting for dusk. And if you notice down the bottom here, the play button has now become a stop sequence button, and there's also another button here that allows you to skip an instruction by just hitting this double arrow here, or if you do this flag, which is the finish line, it moves it to the end of the sequence. So I'm going to leave that to run, because if I look at the next instruction below, it's basically going around this loop cooling the camera and waiting until nautical dusk, and it will just simply go around this loop until nautical dusk has been reached, and then it will start acquiring. So I can leave this sequence and look at the same sequence in the imaging tab, and if you look at it and then scroll up to here, you can see all the little tick marks against all the completed instructions and exactly where it's at with this little circular moving icon. And again, you have a stop button, you have a skip current instruction, or move to the end of the sequence. I think we'll pause that and we'll wait for dusk and create a new video. So thanks for watching.